As a single mother in my later years, I had only one wish: for my only son to finally have a home and a family of his own. He's always been a workaholic, distant and serious, so when he told me he was getting married, I was overjoyed, almost to the point of madness. Everything might have been fine if my new daughter-in-law hadn't beaten my poor cats, poured hot water on my beloved flowers, brought strange men to sleep in my house, and joined a wild party on the very night my son was fighting for his life in the hospital. So, what did I do after witnessing all of that? Make yourself a cup of tea, sit back, and let me tell you the story. And before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video to support me. I worked as a city librarian for over 30 years, a modest job that nonetheless filled my life with meaning. Among the scent of old pages and the quiet hum of turning paper, I found peace. People came and went, searching for answers, and sometimes I could see gratitude shining in their eyes when I helped them find the right book. That, to me, was enough. After I retired, my days became slower but no less full. I lived alone in a small sunlit house at the end of Maple Street, surrounded by 3 cats who followed me like shadows. Each morning I would step into my lavender garden, watering the blossoms and brushing my hands over their soft purple crowns. The scent clung to my clothes, comforting and familiar. I wasn't wealthy, but I was content. My pension covered what I needed, and the little house my late sister left me brought in extra income from the tenants who rented it. It was a simple life, built on routine and small joys, the kind of life that asks for nothing and gives quiet peace in return. I never expected anyone to take care of me. I had learned long ago that independence is a form of dignity. Still, there was one person who remained the center of my heart: my son, Andrew. He was my only child, the bright spark that reminded me that kindness still had a place in this world. Watching him grow into a thoughtful young man had been my proudest achievement. Even after he married and moved into the city, he would call every Sunday just to ask how the cats were doing or if I needed groceries. His wife Laura seemed, at first, to be everything a mother could hope for in a daughter-in-law: smart, elegant, always polite. I told myself Andrew had chosen well. Life felt stable then, like a neatly organized shelf of books, everything in its proper place. I didn't know that soon, one page would turn and nothing would ever look the same again. Andrew was a firefighter, a man who ran toward what others ran away from. His job was grueling, unpredictable, and often cruel, but he carried it with quiet pride. There was a steadiness in him that reminded me of his late father, though perhaps with more gentleness than fire. Every morning before his shift, he would stop by my house for coffee, still in uniform, smelling faintly of smoke and soap. Sometimes his eyes were heavy with exhaustion, yet he always smiled. He lived simply, saving every dollar he could. His small apartment was neat, almost too neat, with nothing but a single chair, a bookshelf, and a framed photo of me holding him as a baby. I used to worry about how alone he seemed. He had friends from the station, of course, but when the calls stopped and the sirens faded, the silence around him felt too thick. Once, during dinner, he said something I've never forgotten. He looked down at his calloused hands and whispered, "Mom, fire teaches you where the line is, between saving someone and losing yourself." I knew then that his work had changed him, carved something deeper in him that I couldn't quite reach. I often reminded him to think about settling down, to find someone who could share his long nights and cold mornings. He would chuckle, brushing it off, saying he hadn't met anyone real enough, someone who wouldn't be frightened by his life. I told myself not to push. Love, after all, can't be forced. Can't be. But when she came along, Laura, everything shifted. She had the kind of beauty that filled a room before she even spoke. Confident, graceful, the kind of woman who seemed to understand exactly how much space she occupied. I remember the first time Andrew brought her over for dinner. She complimented the lavender in my garden, smiled with perfect teeth, and called me ma'am in a tone too polished to be sincere. Andrew's eyes shone that night, so proud, so certain he'd found the one. I wanted to be happy for him, and I tried. I really did. Yet something in me tightened every time she spoke, a subtle chill beneath her charm. I brushed it away, telling myself I was being too protective, that mothers sometimes see ghosts where there are none. But as days passed, I began to sense the distance growing, small at first, then sharper, like smoke sneaking under a closed door. I didn't know it then, but that was the first spark of a fire I would soon have to face myself. I first met Laura at Andrew's birthday party, organized by his colleagues from the fire station. The restaurant was warm and full of laughter, the kind of place where everyone talked over one another, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and grilled meat. Then Laura arrived, and the room seemed to pause for just a moment. She wore a pale blue dress that shimmered softly under the lights, her smile calm and measured, her eyes bright in a way that made people lean closer without realizing it. She introduced herself as a banker, her voice smooth and confident but never loud. She spoke to everyone with easy charm, asking polite questions, laughing at the right moments, and showing the kind of poise that could disarm anyone. When she turned to me, she reached out her hand and said it was an honor to finally meet Andrew's mother. Her tone was gentle, her gaze steady, and I remember thinking how practiced that kindness felt. We sat together for a while, and she listened to my stories about the library as if every word mattered. That's the kind of thing women my age fall for. Someone young who seems to listen with genuine respect. I told myself not to read too much into it. Maybe she really was that considerate. Maybe my son had finally found someone who saw beyond the uniform and long night shifts. Andrew was captivated from the start. I could see it in the way he looked at her, like she was the calm after every fire he'd ever faced. Within months, he proposed, and by spring they were married in a small ceremony at the city park. It all felt too fast, but Andrew looked so happy that I swallowed every doubt I had. In the early months of their marriage, Laura played her role flawlessly. She would drop by my house with homemade pies wrapped in pastel boxes, saying she had baked too many. She helped me water the lavender when Andrew was on night duty, laughing softly as the cats brushed against her legs. She complimented my garden, asked for my cookie recipes, and offered to drive me to the market whenever she could. It was as if she had studied exactly what an ideal daughter-in-law should do, and performed it with perfect timing. Part of me wanted to believe she was genuine, that maybe kindness could be that effortless. But deep inside there was a quiet unease I couldn't name, a feeling that her sweetness was rehearsed, like lines from a well-written play dot. Then came the small requests, the kind that seemed harmless at first. Little things like, "Mom, could you keep a few boxes for us in your garage?" Or, "The rent went up this month. Could you maybe help us out a bit until next payday?" She always said it lightly, with a soft laugh and an affectionate touch on my arm, as if she hated to even ask. And of course I agreed. I told myself it was natural for young couples to struggle in their first years. I had been there once, after all. Helping them felt like the right thing to do, a mother's way of smoothing life's rough edges for her child. But soon, her tone changed. Just slightly, so subtle that I almost missed it. What used to be a shy favor became a quiet expectation. The gratitude in her voice grew thinner, replaced by a calm assumption that I would always say yes. And I did. Because saying no to Andrew's wife somehow felt like saying no to Andrew himself. She had a delicate way of talking about money, always circling the subject as if it embarrassed her, yet always finding her way back to it. One evening, she mentioned that they were undergoing fertility tests, her eyes glistening as she spoke about how expensive it was. Andrew sat beside her, his hand over hers, looking helpless. I felt my heart ache for them. She wiped her tears quickly, apologizing for getting emotional, saying she didn't mean to make me worry. That night, I wrote her a check without hesitation. After that, the pattern deepened. Each story came with a touch of vulnerability: a delayed insurance payment, a broken washing machine, a hospital bill that just came out of nowhere. She told them with such sincerity that I never questioned their truth. I believed her, because I wanted to believe that Andrew had married someone genuine, someone who deserved the love he gave so freely. It took me far too long to realize that every tear, every sigh, every gentle complaint was not a coincidence but a test. She was studying me with precision, finding out exactly where my compassion ended and my foolishness began. Each favor I granted, each time I said yes, marked a point on the invisible map she was drawing, the map of my weaknesses. And I, blind with affection, kept giving, not knowing that love, in the wrong hands, can turn into the easiest thing to exploit. When Laura found out I owned a small house that I rented out, the only property my late sister had left me, something in her tone shifted. Suddenly, she spoke with more warmth than ever, her voice soft, almost affectionate. She called it a family legacy, said it must hold many memories for me. She started visiting more often, bringing flowers, asking gentle questions about my sister as if she truly cared. For a while, I wanted to believe her. Maybe she finally saw me not just as Andrew's mother, but as part of her own family. Then, one afternoon over tea, she mentioned that their landlord had decided to sell the house they were living in. She sighed dramatically, saying they had only a few weeks to move. Her words were carefully chosen, not quite a request, but close enough. After a moment of silence, she added that if I ever considered letting them stay in my sister's house, they would take great care of it, and of course pay the rent on time. I hesitated. That house wasn't just property to me. It was a piece of my sister's life, her laughter still lingering in the wallpaper, her favorite curtains still hanging by the kitchen window. The idea of strangers leaving felt wrong, yet replacing them with family seemed somehow comforting. Laura's persistence, however, made refusal nearly impossible. She was patient, sweet, and relentless, a dangerous combination. A week later, against my better judgment, I agreed. It was a temporary arrangement, I told her. Just a few months, until they found their footing. I made it clear the house remained in my name. She smiled with gratitude so radiant it almost erased my unease. But months passed, and not a single rent payment came. Each time I tried to bring it up, she would wave it away with a smile or a story, some medical bill, some unexpected expense. She always ended with, "We'll catch up next month, Mom. Thank you for understanding." And I did understand, or at least I tried to. I told myself she meant well, that things would balance out soon. One night, I caught my reflection in the mirror after another of her calls. My face looked older, wearier, yet strangely resigned. I realized I hadn't just handed over a house. I had handed her the key to my peace of mind, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever get it back. I decided to take a short vacation to the neighboring state, just a few quiet days by the lake with a stack of books and no responsibilities. I needed that pause, the kind that lets you breathe again after months of small worries building up like dust. When I told Andrew, he smiled and said it was a good idea. But before I could even finish my sentence, Laura jumped in with her usual bright enthusiasm. She insisted on taking care of my house while I was gone. She said she would feed the cats, water the lavender, and make sure everything stayed just as I left it. Her voice was full of charm, soft and sweet. "Mom, you go and relax," she said. "I'll take care of them like they're my own." I hesitated, but she looked so sincere that refusing her seemed rude. I told her where the spare keys were, gave her a few notes about the cat's meals, and thanked her. For a moment, I even felt touched by her gesture. Maybe I was wrong about her, I thought. Maybe she truly wanted to help. Before leaving, I checked the small security cameras I'd installed around the house. One in the living room, another facing the garden, and one at the front door. It was just an old habit, something I'd done ever since living alone. I never used them for anything beyond peace of mind. I certainly didn't expect to see anything unusual. The morning I left, the sun was warm, and the cats rubbed against my legs as if asking me to stay. I packed my books, locked the door, and whispered to them that I'd be home soon. The drive was peaceful. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. No one calling me for help, no quiet manipulations dressed as kindness, no half-truths wrapped in politeness. Just me, the open road, and the sound of my own thoughts. Each night at the lake, I read until I fell asleep to the sound of crickets. My phone stayed silent except for one cheerful text from Laura. "All good here, Mom. The cats love me already." I smiled when I read it. But when I returned home a few days later and opened the security app, what I saw froze my breath. Something inside me shifted, as if the ground itself had betrayed me. From that moment on, I would never sleep peacefully in that house again. One evening at the hotel after dinner, I curled up in bed with my tablet to check on the cats through the home security app. The signal was a little slow, the image slightly grainy, but what appeared on the screen made my stomach twist. Laura was in my living room. Her hair was loose, her expression sharp and impatient. Nothing like the gentle, smiling woman who had promised to care for my home. I watched, frozen, as she kicked one of the cats that had been meowing for food. The tiny creature yelped and ran out of frame. Then, with a motion so casual it terrified me, she picked up a cup of tea from the table and poured it over the lavender pot I had tended for 10 years. The steam rose like a cruel mockery of everything I loved. Then came her voice, cold and cutting, slicing through the quiet of the hotel room. "Stupid old woman and her stupid cats." Each word landed like a blade, stripping away every illusion I had held on to. I felt my throat close, my chest tighten. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she was angry about something else. But there was no mistaking her tone. The disdain, the hatred, the complete lack of respect. This wasn't an outburst. It was revelation. The perfect daughter-in-law, the caring young woman who baked pies and watered my garden, had vanished, replaced by someone I never truly knew. My hands shook as I turned off the tablet. The room felt smaller, colder. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, tapping on the window like a warning. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling something deep inside me collapse. All the memories, her laughter, her careful compliments, the way she called me mom with practiced affection, replayed in my mind, now poisoned by truth. It wasn't kindness, it was calculation. Every smile had been rehearsed, every touch planned to earn trust. And I had been blind enough to believe her. I didn't cry that night. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, there was a stillness, a hollow calm that frightened me more than anger ever could. Because in that silence, I understood something painful and irreversible. The bond I thought we had never existed. It had always been a performance, directed by someone who knew exactly how to play her part. I came home a day earlier than planned, eager to surprise them and hug my cats again. The house was silent when I opened the door, the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful but hollow. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Stale food, mixed with something sour, like milk left too long in the sun. I walked through the living room, my shoes brushing against cat hair scattered on the floor. My heart sank when I reached the garden. The lavender, once blooming proudly under the window, hung limp and brown. The soil was dry and cracked, as if no one had touched it in weeks. The air that used to smell like summer now carried only decay. I called out softly, hoping the cats would come running as they always did. But instead, two of them peeked out from under the couch, their eyes wide and fearful. The third stayed hidden. I crouched down, whispering their names, my voice trembling. It took nearly 10 minutes before they dared to come close. Their fur was matted, their bodies thinner than before. Guilt clawed at me. Inside the kitchen, the chaos deepened. Dishes stacked in the sink, food left uncovered on the counter, a pot of something spoiled releasing a faint, rancid odor. On the dining table sat a half-empty cup of coffee, cold and forgotten. Next to it, my favorite mug lay chipped, the one with my sister's initials, a keepsake I had protected for years. I walked slowly through the hallway, noticing drawers left open, boxes shifted from their usual places. My old photo albums were stacked unevenly, one half open with pages bent. A few small trinkets were missing, not valuable but irreplaceable. The locket my sister gave me, a silver bookmark from my first year at the library, the tiny ceramic cat that used to sit by the window, little things that held my life's quiet meaning, gone without a trace. As I stood there, the house felt different, stripped of warmth, of respect. It was as if someone had walked through my memories with careless hands. I realized then that what Laura had destroyed wasn't just my belongings or my garden. She had violated something much deeper, something sacred, the trust that holds a home together. I sank into the old armchair by the window, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender. The sun was setting outside, painting everything gold, but I felt no comfort in its light. I knew with a certainty that hurt more than anger ever could that my home had been turned into a stage of lies. That afternoon, while I was sorting through the mail, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. Mrs. Harris, my neighbor from the rental house. Her voice trembled the moment I answered. "I thought you should know," she said softly. "I saw a man leaving your rental house last night. Laura was there too." For a few seconds, I couldn't respond. I stood there in silence, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the sound of her anxious breathing. I wasn't surprised. Not really. Deep down, I had known something was wrong long before those words reached me, yet hearing them out loud was like feeling winter creep under my skin. There was no shock, just a cold stillness, the quiet collapse of hope I had stubbornly kept alive. I thanked Mrs. Harris gently, told her not to mention it to anyone, not even to Andrew if she saw him around. She hesitated, saying she didn't want to stir trouble. I reassured her, saying it wasn't trouble, just truth coming to light in its own time. When the call ended, I sat down, staring at the lavender vase on the counter. The flowers were dry and brittle. I hadn't replaced them since coming back. Somehow that felt fitting. My thoughts began to rearrange themselves piece by piece. The missing items from the house, the unpaid rent, the sudden sweetness in Laura's tone when she needed something. Every detail that once seemed harmless now slotted perfectly into place, like fragments of a puzzle I had refused to complete. The picture it formed was ugly but clear. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange calm, almost methodical. Emotion would only cloud my mind now, and I couldn't afford that. If Laura was indeed involved with another man, using my late sister's house as her stage, I needed proof. Not gossip, not suspicion, but evidence. Something undeniable. Not because I wanted revenge. The truth is, I no longer had the energy for hatred. What I needed was protection, for myself and for Andrew, my son who loved blindly, who believed in her goodness because I had once taught him to see the best in people. I couldn't let that mistake destroy him too. So I began to plan quietly. I called an old friend, a retired police officer, to ask about private investigators. I wrote down dates, names, and small details I remembered. Every note was a small act of defiance, a way to take back what she had stolen. My peace, my confidence, my sense of safety. Outside, the evening light dimmed, turning everything a muted gold. I stood by the window, feeling the weight of silence settle once more. This time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like preparation. I checked into a small hotel just a few blocks from the rental house, a modest place with creaky floors and a view of the streetlights below. From my window, I could almost see the corner where the house stood, the house that used to belong to my sister, the one Laura had turned into something I barely recognized. I didn't tell Andrew where I was going. I needed to do this quietly, without interference or guilt. The next morning, I met with the private investigator I had hired, a retired police officer named Mr. Bennett. He was in his late 60s, calm, professional, with the kind of steady eyes that had seen everything and judged nothing. He explained the legal limits of surveillance carefully, making sure I understood what was permissible. No trespassing, no illegal recordings inside, just cameras placed outside the property and routine observations. That was enough. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I only wanted the truth. On the second night, the footage came in. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding, as Mr. Bennett transferred the video to my laptop. The clip was short, no more than 2 minutes, but it said everything words couldn't. Laura stepped out of the front door around 10 p.m., her hair loose, wearing a long coat that caught the porch light. A man followed her out, tall, well-dressed, clearly not my son. They stood close, talking softly. Then without hesitation he leaned in and kissed her. She didn't resist. She smiled. He brushed a strand of hair from her face before getting into his car and driving away. I felt my chest tighten. The video ended with Laura standing there checking her phone, then walking back inside as if nothing had happened. Mr. Bennet watched me quietly before speaking. His voice was low, respectful. "Ma'am, you might want to talk to your lawyer before you talk to her." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop. This was it, the confirmation I had feared and expected all at once. The mask had finally cracked, revealing the truth beneath. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint traffic outside, the ticking of the clock. Everything felt distant, unreal. I sat by the window, staring at the streetlights, thinking about Andrew, about how his heart would break when he learned the truth. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Proof was power, and power in the right hands could bring justice. I would need patience, caution, and strength, the quiet kind that doesn't shout, but endures. The private investigator returned 2 days later, holding a small flash drive and a somber expression. He didn't say much, only that what he found was clear enough to speak for itself. I plugged it into my laptop, and within seconds, the video appeared. The setting was a luxury restaurant by the lake, chandeliers glittering above, champagne glasses clinking, laughter echoing through the frame. And there she was, Laura, my daughter-in-law, dressed in a striking red dress, her smile wide, her eyes shining with a kind of pride that felt almost cruel to me now. She was surrounded by friends, all dressed expensively, toasting as if celebrating a victory. For a brief second, I almost wanted to believe it was some innocent dinner, but then the camera zoomed closer, and I saw it. She reached into her purse, pulled out a familiar gold credit card, and handed it to the waiter with a careless flick of her hand. The camera paused, and the name printed on that card came into view. Margaret L. Evans. My name. The investigator stopped the video there, glancing at me to make sure I was ready before resuming. The final frames showed the receipt, over $4,000 charged at that lakeside restaurant. I stared at it, my throat dry, my fingers trembling as I pressed pause. The screen reflected my face, pale and motionless next to hers, her red dress, my golden card. I wasn't angry about the money. Money can be earned back, replaced, rebuilt. What broke me was the realization that she had used something that symbolized my trust, my name, my account, as if it were nothing more than a tool for her vanity. I remembered the day I gave her that card months ago. For emergencies only, I had said. She had smiled sweetly, hugged me, and promised she'd never use it without asking. I believed her, foolishly, wholeheartedly. Now, watching her laugh over champagne bought with my trust, I felt something inside me go still. The kind of stillness that comes not from shock, but from clarity. I saw her for who she was, not a daughter-in-law, not a victim of circumstance, but a woman who saw kindness as weakness and generosity as an open door to take more. The investigator's voice was quiet. "Mrs. Evans, this is fraud," he said. "You have every right to report it." But I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just sat there, my hands folded tightly on my lap, realizing that the most painful betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the ones we once called family. The private investigator returned 2 days later, holding a small flash drive and a somber expression. He didn't say much, only that what he found was clear enough to speak for itself. I plugged it into my laptop, and within seconds the video appeared. The setting was a luxury restaurant by the lake, chandeliers glittering above, champagne glasses clinking, laughter echoing through the frame. And there she was, Laura, my daughter-in-law, dressed in a striking red dress, her smile wide, her eyes shining with a kind of pride that felt almost cruel to me now. She was surrounded by friends, all dressed expensively, toasting as if celebrating a victory. For a brief second, I almost wanted to believe it was some innocent dinner, but then the camera zoomed closer, and I saw it. She reached into her purse, pulled out a familiar gold credit card, and handed it to the waiter with a careless flick of her hand. The camera paused, and the name printed on that card came into view. Margaret L. Evans. My name. The investigator stopped the video there, glancing at me to make sure I was ready before resuming. The final frames showed the receipt, Over $4,000 charged at that lakeside restaurant. I stared at it, my throat dry, my fingers trembling as I pressed pause. The screen reflected my face, pale and motionless next to hers, her red dress, my golden card. I wasn't angry about the money. Money can be earned back, replaced, rebuilt. What broke me was the realization that she had used something that symbolized my trust, my name, my account, as if it were nothing more than a tool for her vanity. I remembered the day I gave her that card months ago, for emergencies only, I had said. She had smiled sweetly, hugged me, and promised she'd never use it without asking. I believed her, foolishly, wholeheartedly. Now, watching her laugh over champagne bought with my trust, I felt something inside me go still, the kind of stillness that comes not from shock, but from clarity. I saw her for who she was, not a daughter-in-law, not a victim of circumstance, but a woman who saw kindness as weakness and generosity as an open door to take more. The investigator's voice was quiet. "Mrs. Evans, this is fraud," he said. "You have every right to report it." But I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just sat there, my hands folded tightly on my lap, realizing that the most painful betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the ones we once called family. A month earlier, Laura had brought it up so casually that I didn't think twice. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner when she smiled and said, "Mom, why don't you open a credit card at my bank? You'd get a lower interest rate and great travel rewards. It's a smart financial move." She sounded so professional, so certain, that I almost felt proud of her. My daughter-in-law, the successful banker, helping me manage things I'd never paid much attention to. She came over the next day with a neatly organized folder, forms already filled out, highlighted sections for my signature, and even a sticky note that said, "Just sign here, I'll handle the rest." Her tone was calm and reassuring. "It's just a formality, Mom," she said. "I'll help you activate it right away. It'll take 5 minutes." She guided my hand to the signature line like she'd done this 100 times for clients. I didn't even question it. I remember thinking how efficient she was, how modern banking must have become. I felt grateful, even a little embarrassed that I couldn't keep up with new financial tools. I signed where she pointed, trusting her completely. After all, who questions their own family? It wasn't until weeks later, after everything began unraveling, that I discovered what she had really done. In one of the statements sent to my email, one I never bothered to open until then, I saw her name listed under Authorized User. My heart dropped. I called the bank immediately, and the representative confirmed that an additional card had been issued under her name, activated on the same day I had signed those forms. It was all perfectly legal on paper, but only because I had unknowingly signed the authorization myself. The realization hit me like a cold slap. I remembered her careful politeness that day, the way she made small talk to distract me while sliding papers across the table. It wasn't an accident. It was premeditated, deliberate. She had known exactly what she was doing, and exactly how much I trusted her. When I explained the situation to my investigator, he nodded grimly. "It's a classic financial manipulation," he said. "Hard to prove intent unless we can show she used the account for personal gain." I didn't need more proof. I already knew. The card in that video, the one with my name, was the same one she had so cleverly tied to herself. That was when I stopped feeling foolish and started feeling resolved. Her intelligence, once something I admired, had turned into a weapon. But even the sharpest weapon cuts both ways when truth comes to light. When I finally gathered the courage to open the full bank statements, I expected to find small charges, maybe a few dinners, some shopping, something that could still be explained away. But as I scrolled through the list, my breath caught in my throat. The transactions weren't small. They were extravagant. There were purchases from luxury boutiques in Columbus, a resort stay at an oceanside hotel, and one transaction that made my stomach turn: a yacht party booking totaling nearly $12,000. The description even included the words "private event catering." It wasn't just a mistake, it was a lifestyle built on my name. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Each charge carried a timestamp, neatly aligned across several weeks, as if someone had planned the withdrawals with precision. Then came the smaller transfers, a few $100s here and there, marked with friendly, harmless notes: reimbursement for groceries, shared expenses, house maintenance. On paper, it almost looked reasonable. Almost. I could see exactly what she was doing. She wasn't careless, she was calculated. By labeling the transfers as reimbursements, she was trying to leave a trail that looked innocent, as though she had been managing household finances on my behalf. But every dollar came from the same card, the one she had manipulated me into opening, the one bearing my signature. I printed the statements out one by one, watching the pages pile up like evidence in a courtroom. Boutique, resort, jewelry, restaurant. Each line item whispered the same truth. This wasn't about need, it was greed. Cold, methodical greed dressed up in politeness and charm. That evening, I sat at my desk and went over the numbers again, tracing each entry with a pen. The further I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a misuse of trust or a family misunderstanding. This was fraud. Organized, deliberate, and far too coordinated to be an accident. She had built a system, using my credit, my reputation, and my silence, to fund her illusion of success. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes after denial finally dies. I knew then that this wasn't a matter for family discussion or forgiveness. It was a matter for the law. I wasn't just a mother-in-law she had deceived. I was her victim, and I intended to stop pretending otherwise. I spent the entire morning preparing. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the printer as it spat out page after page of bank statements. Each line of ink felt like a wound reopening, but I kept going. I sorted the documents into neat folders, one for the fraudulent charges, one for the video files, and one for proof that every account, every card, was registered solely under my name. When I was done, I slid the USB drive into a small envelope and sealed it carefully, the way you might handle something sacred. These weren't just papers anymore. They were the truth, and I was ready to let the truth speak for me. That afternoon, I planned to meet Laura at a small cafe near my neighborhood. A quiet place with big windows and the smell of roasted coffee beans. Neutral ground. I chose it deliberately. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want shouting or tears. I only wanted to look her in the eye and see how far she would go to deny what I already knew. Would she pretend surprise? Would she cry? Or would she twist her lies one more time, confident that I'd fold the way I always had? As I packed my folder into my handbag, I rehearsed the calm I would need to keep. My voice steady, my words measured. I wasn't going to lose control. I had learned that dignity was the most powerful weapon a woman could carry, especially when standing before deceit. I would let the law speak for me. No threats, no drama, just facts. For a moment I caught my reflection in the mirror. An older woman, tired but composed, with eyes that had seen enough betrayal to last a lifetime. I took a deep breath, ready to step into the storm with quiet strength. And then the phone rang. The screen flashed the hospital's name. My heart stopped. I answered quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. On the other end was a nurse, her tone trembling. "Mrs. Evans," she said, "your son's been injured in a fire." For a second, the world went silent. The folder in my hands slipped to the floor, pages scattering like fallen leaves. The USB rolled under the table. I couldn't move. All the plans, all the anger, all the careful control vanished in an instant. I whispered, "Is he alive?" The nurse hesitated, then said softly, "He's stable, but you should come right away." The storm I had been preparing for had arrived, just not the one I expected. The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the floor like broken pieces of the life I thought I had under control. My mind went blank except for two images that burned into me like fire: my son trapped in flames, and my daughter-in-law laughing under the glittering lights of some party she paid for with my trust. I grabbed my car keys and ran. The drive to the hospital felt endless. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I dialed Laura's number again and again. The first few calls rang without answer. Then the line went busy. Finally, it went dead. She had turned off her phone. The realization cut deeper than I expected. Even in crisis, she had chosen silence. Maybe she didn't know yet. Or maybe, I thought bitterly, she simply didn't care. The highway blurred around me, lights streaking through my tears. I barely remembered how I got there, only that every red light felt like an eternity. When I reached the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and burned plastic hit me like a wall. The nurse at the desk recognized my name, her eyes widening. "Mrs. Evans, please come quickly," she said. They led me into the ICU, and there he was, my Andrew. My boy who once ran into fires to save others now lay helpless under a sheet of white. His skin was scorched, his breathing heavy and uneven beneath the tubes and monitors. For a second, I couldn't move. The world narrowed to the faint rhythm of the heart monitor. Beep, pause, beep. The doctor approached quietly, his face calm but grave. "He's stable for now," he said, "but we need consent to proceed with the next phase of treatment. It may be risky, but it's necessary." I took the clipboard from his hands and signed without hesitation. My tears fell onto the page, blurring my name, Margaret L. Evans. But the signature was firm. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about investigations or credit reports or legal documents. I was a mother, standing between life and death, holding on to the only thing that still mattered. But as I looked at my son's still face, another truth rose inside me, sharp, unwavering. Laura had built her life on lies, and those lies had nearly destroyed him. I wiped my tears, my hands trembling, and whispered under my breath, "I will save my son, and I will end the one who's been destroying his life." The machines kept beeping steadily, like a promise that there was still time. Time to heal, time to fight back, and time to make everything right again. I sat in the ICU waiting room for what felt like forever. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic, and every clock ticked too loudly in that heavy silence. My phone rested in my trembling hands as I kept pressing the same button. Call. The screen lit up with her name each time. Laura. The first call rang several times before it went to voicemail. The second one was cut off after 2 rings. By the fifth attempt, her number went straight to unavailable. I tried again anyway, over and over. Each time the dial tone buzzed in my ear, I imagined her face, calm, composed, pretending nothing had happened. Maybe she was still at some dinner table, maybe still smiling for a photo, her world untouched by the fire that had nearly taken my son's life. Every unanswered call chipped away at the last fragments of doubt I had left. It was all so clear now. Her silence wasn't shock or fear or grief. It was avoidance. She was hiding, waiting for the storm to pass, hoping I'd be too broken to fight. But she was wrong. I lowered the phone and looked through the glass window toward the ICU. Andrew lay motionless, surrounded by tubes and wires. Machines breathed for him, their steady rhythm the only sign of life. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. The anger I felt wasn't burning anymore. It had cooled, hardened, and settled deep inside me like steel. I stared at his hand resting on the bed, his fingers bandaged and still. Once, those same hands had pulled people out of burning houses, had held mine on long drives, had built everything he believed in. Now they were lifeless, and I couldn't help but think that love, his greatest strength, had also been his downfall. I whispered under my breath, the words steady and calm. "From now on, no one will hurt you again. Not her, not anyone." The nurse came by to check on him, offering a sympathetic smile. I nodded faintly, pretending I was fine. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't just a mother waiting anymore. I was preparing. Each unanswered call, each silent minute was no longer wasted time. It was fuel, quiet, precise, and controlled. When the last call went straight to voicemail again, I finally turned off my phone and sat back. The plan forming in my mind wasn't about anger. It was about protection. And justice. When I bent down to check my phone, I wasn't expecting anything. Maybe a message from a nurse or a call from a relative. But instead, the screen lit up with a live video. Laura's face appeared, bright and glowing, framed by sunlight and sea breeze. She wasn't at the hospital. She was on a yacht, a sleek white yacht with polished decks, laughter echoing in the background, and music thumping over the sound of waves. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I typed a quick message, my fingers shaking. Laura, your husband's in critical condition. Please come to the hospital. The message went through. I saw the small gray checkmark turn blue. Seen. Then nothing. No reply, no call, no sign of concern. Instead, she tilted her head toward the camera, her smile wide and perfect, as if the world had never demanded anything of her. She raised her glass of champagne among a crowd of friends dressed in white and gold. They cheered, clinking their glasses while she laughed and shouted over the music. Her caption floated across the screen. Finally, freedom. Hundreds of hearts and laughing emojis bloomed below the video. I stared at the screen, numb. Behind me, the steady rhythm of the ventilator filled the room, a hollow, mechanical breath, the sound of my son's fragile life clinging to existence. Each beep of the monitor was a heartbeat he could no longer feel, while his wife toasted her new beginning under the afternoon sun. There were no tears left in me. Shock had burned everything clean. Instead, I pressed the side button and took a screenshot. Then another, and another. I saved them all, not just as evidence, but as a memorial for the last illusion I had ever believed in. For a long while, I sat in that hospital chair, staring at both screens. The one that showed my son's pulse, and the one that showed the woman who had sworn to love him. Two worlds, coexisting for a moment, one filled with noise, lights, and applause, the other with silence, tubes, and fading hope. That was the moment something in me broke quietly. Not in anger, but in certainty. The kind of certainty that feels like frost settling over a once burning wound. I looked at Andrew's still face, brushed his hand gently, and whispered, "You don't have to worry anymore, my love. I'll handle the rest." I stood up from the hard plastic chair, the hospital room and its humming machines folding into the background like scenery I no longer recognized, and I walked out with a purpose that surprised even me. Outside, the corridor smelled of disinfectant and detergent, and the fluorescent lights made everything look too clean for the kind of mess my life had become. My fingers still trembled from the adrenaline, but my voice did not when I dialed the bank. I spoke slowly and clearly, choosing each word as if I were arranging stones into a wall. I asked to speak to someone who could help with fraud, and the representative came on the line with the practiced calm of someone who handled financial emergencies all day. I told her to freeze every account, to cancel every card, to place a hold on any pending transfers, and to flag my name for fraud monitoring. I said that I wanted everything stopped the moment she heard me, that nothing was to be authorized without direct confirmation from me in person. The woman on the other end repeated the steps she would take and asked a few verification questions. I answered them without hesitation. When she said the words that confirmed the lockdown was in place, a small, physical release happened in my chest. It was not a triumphant moment. There was no sweetness to it. Instead, there was a sense of closing a door, of building a barrier that could keep the last shards of my security safe, however fragile they now were. Walking back into the intensive care unit felt different. The air in the room seemed heavier, but my head was clearer. I adjusted the tubing by Andrew's shoulder, reattached the bag that fed him water, and smoothed the blanket across his knees. He lay there quiet, the monitors mapping his breath and pulse in tiny, steady waves. I touched his hand, felt the warmth still there despite the burns and the bandages. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe I had done something that would make a difference. Not vengeance, not a clever trap, but a boundary, drawn firmly and legally. I would let the law and the institutions I had trusted do their work while I focused on care and recovery. I sat down and watched the steady lines on the monitor, feeling a calm that was not soft but sharp. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was an active thing, a defensive quiet that protected him and, in its way, fought back against the deceit that had brought us here. I closed my eyes and promised myself to move forward with prudence, to speak when necessary, but to act with the precision of someone who had learned that patience and paperwork could be as powerful as fury. Then I opened my eyes and watched the rhythm of the machines, grateful that in this modest and legal way I had put a shield between my son and the world that would seek to harm him again. An hour later, the silence I had built around us began to crack. My phone started vibrating on the hospital table, again and again, until the sound became a steady hum in the sterile air. The screen lit up with names: Laura, her friends, and a string of unfamiliar numbers. It was like watching a storm roll in, one message at a time. The first text glared up at me in all caps. "What did you do? They declined my card. Fix this now." I stared at it, the words pulsing with panic, and felt nothing. No anger, no triumph, just a strange stillness. I scrolled through the next few messages. They came fast, each one sharper than the last. "You can't do this to me! This is a misunderstanding. You'll regret this." Then the tone changed. Desperate apologies, voice messages full of crying, then silence. The calls followed. Dozens of them. The phone vibrated across the table, rattling beside the cup of cold hospital coffee I'd forgotten to drink. I let it ring. Once, twice, 20 times. I didn't need to hear her voice. I already knew what it would sound like. The same voice that used to call me Mom, with sweetness she never meant. I let every call go unanswered until finally the screen went dark. The storm had passed. I turned back to the hospital bed. Andrew lay still, his chest rising and falling beneath the thin blanket. I adjusted the edge of it, pulling it up gently over his hand, the same hand that had once built tree houses, fixed broken faucets, carried me to the car when my legs had failed. His skin was warm beneath mine, fragile but real. "It's all right, my son," I whispered, my voice steady. "Mom's here." The machines hummed softly, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel helpless. Every decision I had made, every document, every signature, every block on every card, was a thread pulling us back from the chaos Laura had spun. The money didn't matter. The reputation didn't matter. What mattered was that he would wake up to a world where she no longer controlled him, where every lie she'd told was beginning to crumble. I placed the phone face down on the table, silenced and harmless now, and looked at my son again. "Everything," I said softly, "is finding its way back to where it belongs." When night fell, the hospital quieted into that strange stillness only broken by machines. The rhythmic sound of the ventilator blended with the soft beeping of monitors, forming a fragile symphony that seemed to echo inside my own chest. Each breath Andrew took with the help of those tubes matched my heartbeat, steady, patient, unwavering. For the first time in days, I wasn't trembling. I wasn't angry. I was simply awake, grounded, and aware of what needed to be done. I sat by the window, watching the faint glow of city lights flicker in the distance. The storm had passed for now, but I knew it wasn't over, not even close. The real battle was only beginning, one that wouldn't be fought with emotion or outburst, but with reason, law, and proof. I had already gathered the pieces: the fraudulent transactions, the videos, the screenshots, the lies she'd tried to bury. Soon, all of it would speak louder than her polished words ever could. I realized how quiet strength works. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention. It waits. It collects facts, builds its armor, and moves when the timing is right. Laura had underestimated me because I'd been gentle, because I'd smiled and believed in family. But that gentleness had hardened into something else now. Not cruelty, but clarity. Andrew stirred slightly in his sleep, and I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Rest, my son," I whispered. "The worst part is over." I wasn't sure if I was comforting him or myself, but I meant every word. He had spent years running into burning buildings to save strangers. Now it was my turn to walk through the flames for him. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the linoleum floor. The nurses passed quietly in the hallway, their footsteps soft like falling ash. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the sterile air that carried the faintest trace of lavender from the lotion I'd used earlier. It reminded me of my garden, of peace, the kind I intended to reclaim. When I opened my eyes again, the fear was gone. What remained was focus, a mother's calm before the storm. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the witness, the protector, the one who would turn every lie into evidence, every wound into reason. The woman who once begged for family harmony had now become the guardian of truth. The machines hummed on, faithful and constant. Their rhythm matched the quiet vow forming in my heart. Tomorrow begins the fight, and I am ready. I had just finished signing another round of treatment forms for Andrew when the sound of heels broke through the stillness of the corridor. Sharp, fast, furious. Each click against the tile grew louder, slicing through the quiet hum of machines and whispered prayers around us. I turned instinctively, and there she was, Laura. Her hair was messy, her eyes blazing, the perfect image of a storm in designer heels. But it wasn't worry that shaped her face, it was rage, the kind that only comes when control slips through one's fingers. She didn't glance at the ICU door. She didn't ask about Andrew, didn't even pretend. Instead, she stormed toward me, phone clutched tightly in one manicured hand, voice high and trembling. "You froze my card! How dare you!" The words echoed down the corridor, bouncing off white walls and startled faces. Nurses paused mid-step. A family at the far end stopped praying, their heads lifting, eyes wide. Even the security guard by the elevator turned. For a moment, it felt as if the entire hospital had stopped breathing. I stood still. The calm I had built inside me didn't falter. I looked at her, this woman who had worn kindness like perfume, who had smiled her way into our lives, now unraveling under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Laura," I said quietly, my voice steady, "your husband is fighting for his life in there. This is not the time." But she didn't hear me, or maybe she chose not to. She waved her phone in the air, her voice rising. "You had no right. Those accounts were joint. You—" "They weren't joint," I interrupted, still soft but unyielding. "Everything was in my name. Everything you touched, you took, without asking." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Around us, people pretended not to watch, but they did. Nurses frozen, the faint beep of monitors filling the void between words. I could see the flicker in her eyes, that moment when anger turns to fear, when the truth begins to corner the liar. Her breathing quickened. She glanced around, realizing how public this had become. Her carefully built image was cracking right here, among witnesses who didn't know her story but would remember her face. "You did this to yourself," I said finally, "and I won't let you do it to him." She stared at me, trembling, mascara streaking down her cheek. Then she turned sharply, her heels clattering down the hall, retreating into the cold light of the exit. The corridor returned to silence. A nurse touched my arm gently. "Are you all right, Mrs. Evans?" I nodded, my gaze drifting toward Andrew's room. "Yes," I whispered. "For the first time in a long while, I think I am." I rose slowly from the chair, the medical file still in my hand. The papers rustled softly, but my voice came out low and steady. "Your husband is fighting for his life," I said, each word measured, deliberate. "And that's what you care about?" The corridor seemed to hold its breath. A nurse froze mid-step, another turned her head. Even the family down the hall stopped whispering their prayers. For a long second, all I could hear was the faint, synchronized beeping from the ICU. Andrew's heartbeat echoing through the sterile air like a reminder of everything fragile and real. Laura blinked, clearly taken aback. She took half a step backward, the sound of her heels softer now, uncertain. I could see the flicker of something in her eyes. Confusion, then fear, then anger trying to return but failing to find ground. She hadn't expected me to speak, at least not like this. To her, I was just an old woman, fragile, compliant, easy to manipulate. She didn't expect strength to sound so calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Silence was louder now. It filled the space between us, sharp as glass. I looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had worn charm like armor and greed like perfume. Her mascara was smeared, her lipstick uneven. She was still trying to look composed, but the cracks were already showing. "You see," I said softly, taking a small step closer, "money can be replaced. Houses can be rebuilt. Cards can be canceled. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But when you lose your soul, Laura, when you trade compassion for pride, there's no bank in the world that can buy it back. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time, she couldn't find a lie to fill the silence. Her hand, still clutching the phone, trembled slightly. The nurse standing nearby looked between us, unsure whether to intervene. But I didn't move closer. I didn't need to humiliate her. The truth was already doing that. I met her gaze one last time, steady and unflinching. "Go home," I said quietly. "Look at yourself in the mirror. Maybe then you'll understand what you've really lost." She blinked again, her chin quivering just slightly before she turned and walked away, the echo of her heels fading down the hall. The moment she disappeared, the corridor came alive again. Footsteps, murmurs, the steady rhythm of machines returning. I exhaled slowly, clutching the file to my chest. My hands were steady. My voice, though quiet, had found its power again. Dot. She started speaking fast, her words tripping over one another like she could outrun the truth if she just spoke quickly enough. "You don't understand," she said, voice sharp with panic. "I was working. You misunderstood. It was a client event, not a party. You've got it all wrong." Her voice echoed off the sterile walls, the desperation cracking through the polish she had always worn. She gestured wildly, her gold bracelet clinking against the phone in her hand, as if sound itself could help her rebuild the illusion she had just lost. I said nothing. I simply looked at her, not with anger, but with the kind of quiet disbelief one reserves for a child caught in a lie they still think they can defend. Then, without a word, I reached into my bag, unlocked my phone, and tapped the screen. The sound of laughter filled the hallway, bright, unrestrained, cruelly joyful. On the screen, Laura appeared in perfect lighting, hair blowing in the sea breeze, glass of champagne raised high, surrounded by friends in glittering dresses. Her caption sparkled at the bottom. "Finally, freedom." I set the phone down on the waiting room table between us and stepped back. The video kept playing, the clinking of glasses, the music, the camera panning to her smiling face, so alive and radiant it almost hurt to look at. Laura froze. Her eyes widened, pupils dilating, breath catching in her throat. The color drained from her face. Her fingers twitched as if she wanted to snatch the phone away but couldn't bring herself to touch it. For a second she tried to speak, but her voice failed her. Only a small, broken sound escaped, the sound of denial meeting proof. Around us, the world didn't need to move. The truth had already filled the air, thick and undeniable. A nurse walked by, one of the older ones, gray hair tied neatly back, clipboard in hand. She paused when she saw the two of us. Her gaze shifted from me to the phone, then to Laura, who stood frozen beside it. The nurse's eyes softened, not with judgment but with pity. The kind of pity reserved for people who had done this to themselves. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The video kept playing, its laughter echoing into the silence. Laura turned away, her shoulders trembling, her hand rising to cover her mouth as if she could hide from the reflection staring back at her. The nurse sighed quietly, gave me a gentle nod, and walked on. I picked up my phone, stopped the video, and slipped it back into my bag. The evidence was already enough. The performance was over. I picked up my phone, slid it back into my bag, and looked at her one last time. My voice came out calm, even, every word shaped with precision. "From now on," I said slowly, "you'll speak to my lawyer, not to me." For a moment she just stood there, her face flushing red. The hand clutching her purse trembled as she tried to form a reply. Her mouth opened, then closed again, the words dying in her throat. Around us, the quiet murmur of the hospital had resumed, but every eye seemed to glance in her direction, every passing nurse or visitor pretending not to stare yet unable to look away. The power she used to wield with her charm had vanished. Without her mask, she was simply another woman exposed, cornered by her own lies, undone by the evidence she could no longer deny. I watched her lower her gaze, fingers tightening around the strap of her purse, anger and humiliation mixing in the red of her cheeks. But she said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. I turned away. My shoes clicked softly against the polished floor as I walked back toward the ICU. The air felt heavier there, but also cleaner, like the first breath after a long storm. The door opened with a soft hiss, and I stepped inside. Behind me, Laura remained standing in the hallway, frozen in the same spot, surrounded by silence that no apology could fill. When the door closed, the sound felt final, a line drawn between two worlds. On one side lay truth, pain, and the quiet endurance that comes from love. On the other stood deceit, vanity, and the hollow echo of everything false. For years, those worlds had overlapped, feeding off each other. But not anymore. I walked to Andrew's bedside, the machines steady in their rhythm. His face was still pale but peaceful, untouched by the chaos outside. I pulled a chair close and sat down, resting my hand on his arm. For the first time in a long while, my shoulders didn't ache. The tension that had lived in me for years, the waiting, the suspicion, the fear, began to fade. This wasn't victory. There was no satisfaction in watching someone collapse under the weight of their own lies. It was something quieter, gentler, a relief so deep it felt like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. I looked at my son and whispered softly, "It's over now. You're safe." Outside, the world would keep turning. But for me, in that small, sterile room, peace had finally found its place. When I sat back down beside Andrew's bed, the sun had begun to set. A line of golden light stretched across the sterile white wall, cutting through the quiet room. It fell softly over his face, pale, still, but peaceful. The kind of peace that comes after a long storm. I reached for his hand, cool beneath mine, and held it gently. "It's over, my dear," I whispered. She showed herself. The words hung in the air, not heavy, not triumphant, just true. Outside the window, the city glowed in muted shades of amber and gray, life carrying on as if nothing had happened. But inside this room, everything had changed. The lies, the pretense, the noise, all of it had finally fallen silent. From the hallway came the fading click of high heels. Laura's footsteps, sharp, hurried, and hollow. The sound echoed once, twice, and then faded into nothing, swallowed by the mechanical hiss of the hospital's automatic doors closing behind her. That final thud, dry and absolute, felt like punctuation, an ending, clean and irreversible. I didn't move. I just sat there, listening to the soft beeping of the heart monitor, each sound steady and alive. It reminded me that some things, honesty, love, and quiet endurance, outlast everything else. For so long I had imagined justice as something loud, a courtroom verdict, a confession shouted in tears, a dramatic apology. But in that moment, I understood it differently. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise or punishment. Sometimes it simply unfolds in silence, when truth steps into the light and leaves deceit with nowhere to hide. Laura's punishment didn't need my words or the law's weight. It had already begun the moment she saw that video, the moment she realized she could no longer pretend. There is a kind of pain in being exposed, the pain of seeing yourself without disguise. And that, I knew, would stay with her far longer than any sentence a judge could deliver. I brushed Andrew's hair gently from his forehead. He didn't stir, but I knew he could feel me there. Outside, the sunlight thinned into dusk, turning the walls golden, then gray. The machines kept their rhythm, steady, loyal, alive. For the first time in years, I felt no anger, no fear, only quiet certainty. Justice had already spoken, not with vengeance, but with truth. And in its stillness, I found peace. The next morning, I drove to my old lawyer's office, the same one who had helped me handle my sister's inheritance years ago. The drive was quiet, the streets still wrapped in the pale calm of early daylight. I parked, took a deep breath, and carried a neatly bound folder under my arm. Inside it was everything: the bank statements, the screenshots, the live stream video, and the footage from the security camera. Proof, not of revenge, but of truth. When I stepped into his office, he looked up with a faint smile, the kind reserved for someone returning not as a client in distress, but as a woman who had already made peace with her decision. He gestured for me to sit. I placed the folder on his desk and pushed it gently toward him. "This is everything," I said simply. He adjusted his glasses, opened the folder, and flipped through the pages carefully, his eyes scanning each document, each timestamp, each captured image. After a long silence, he closed the folder and looked up at me. "Mrs. Evans," he said, his tone calm but resolute, "you have everything you need. Now you just have to be patient." Together, we filled out the report, a formal claim for financial fraud. Every sentence we wrote felt like another stone placed in the foundation of justice. He made a second copy and slipped it into a large envelope addressed to the local police department. Then, without hesitation, he drafted a separate notice to the bank where Laura worked. Professional misconduct, breach of ethics, potential criminal charges. The words sounded heavy, but they were clean, precise, like cutting a rotten branch to save the tree. As I signed the final page, I felt no tremor in my hand. The signature was firm, deliberate, not a mark of anger, but of closure. When it was done, my lawyer nodded approvingly. "You've taken the right step," he said. "Now let the law do what it was meant to do." I left the office into the soft morning sun. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the city seemed to move at its usual pace, unaware that something important, something right, had just begun. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. Not because I had won, but because I had stopped fighting alone. There was no bitterness left in me, no hunger for punishment, only clarity. The kind that comes when truth finally stands on its own, unshaken, undeniable. I walked toward my car, head held high, ready to let justice take its slow, steady course. I mailed the letter on a Monday morning, formal, polite, and final. It was a notice giving Laura 30 days to vacate the house I had once let her and Andrew live in temporarily. The envelope contained no emotion, only facts: the address, the dates, the signature. I sent it through certified mail, not out of spite, but to make sure there would be no more confusion, no more room for manipulation. Her response came faster than I expected. Angry messages, phone calls, and eventually a lawyer's email filled with empty threats. She demanded her share of the property, claiming she had a right to it as Andrew's wife. But my lawyer had already prepared everything, every deed, every date, every record proving that the house was mine long before her name ever entered our family. The ownership was clear, the law was silent but firm. For the next few weeks, I didn't check on the house. I let time and legality do their work, and when the 30 days were over, I drove there myself. It was a strange feeling, returning not as a landlord, but as someone reclaiming a piece of their past. The key turned stiffly in the lock. The moment the door opened, I was met with stillness, the kind that hangs in the air after people leave too quickly. The living room was bare. The curtains had been taken down, the furniture gone, only a faint outline on the carpet where a coffee table used to sit. A few forgotten items remained: a half-burned candle, a chipped mug, a single earring on the floor near the window. All traces of a life performed, not lived. I walked slowly through each room. The walls were empty but somehow lighter, as if relieved. The air smelled of dust and something else, freedom maybe. It was as though the house itself had been waiting, holding its breath through months of deceit, and could finally exhale. In the kitchen, I opened a cabinet and found one of my old porcelain plates, a floral pattern I had loved years ago, left behind like a memory that refused to break. I smiled faintly, put it back, and moved toward the window. The afternoon light spilled in, warm and forgiving. I unlatched the window, pushed it open, and let the wind sweep through the empty space. The curtains billowed gently against the walls, stirring away the last traces of someone else's lies. I looked out at the garden, the lavender bushes still holding on from last season, and whispered, "This house has survived more lies than I ever imagined." And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had too. That morning began like any other. The hospital room was bathed in a soft gray light, the kind that slips through blinds before the sun fully rises. I was standing by the window, replacing the wilted flowers in the vase with fresh ones I had brought from home. The quiet hiss of the oxygen machine filled the space. Then, a sound I hadn't heard in days. A whisper. "Mom!" I turned quickly. Andrew's eyes were open, faint but steady. For a moment I just stared, my heart caught between relief and fear. I moved to his bedside, pulled a chair close, and took his hand. It was weak but warm, and when he met my gaze, I saw something different. Not just exhaustion, clarity. "You're awake," I murmured, squeezing his fingers. He blinked slowly, his lips dry. "Tell me," he whispered, "what happened while I was gone?" I hesitated only a moment. Then I told him everything. The charges on my card, the secret live stream, the house she tried to claim, the cats, the lies, the luxury trips. As I spoke, my voice didn't shake. I wanted him to hear the truth, not the bitterness. Andrew didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes fixed on mine, his breath shallow but steady. The silence stretched between us like a bridge, the kind you cross only once. When I finished, he turned his face slightly toward the window. The golden light had begun to warm the room, casting a faint glow over his bandaged arm. He was quiet for a long time. The monitor beeped steadily, a slow rhythm matching the weight of the moment. Finally, he exhaled, a sound almost like a sigh and a decision at once. "I know," he said softly. "I can't go back. I can't keep living with someone who despises love, who treats life like it's disposable." His voice broke slightly on the last word, but his eyes stayed clear. There was no anger in them, only a quiet resolve, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted to be true. I leaned closer, pressing my forehead gently against his. "We'll get through this," I whispered, "one step at a time." Outside, the morning grew brighter, and for the first time in months, the weight between us began to lift. A week later, the headline appeared in the local paper. Bold, unforgiving letters stretched across the front page. "Local banker fired amid financial misconduct allegations." Beneath it was a photo of Laura, wearing a gray coat, her hair unkempt, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. She was caught mid-step, one hand raised to block the camera, the other clutching her purse like a shield. But nothing could protect her anymore. Not her charm, not her lies, not even the polished image she had built so carefully. The story spread quickly. Every website, every social media feed carried her name. The video from the yacht, the one she had proudly live-streamed, was now playing on countless screens. The caption that once read, "Finally freedom," had become a symbol of disgrace. People commented beneath it, "She partied while her husband was dying." The words were harsh, but they weren't wrong. I sat at the kitchen table of my quiet home, the newspaper unfolded before me. The lavender outside swayed gently in the morning breeze. The sunlight glinted off the rim of my teacup, and the world, somehow, felt still again. I read every line, slowly, without emotion. There was no triumph in it, no vindictive joy, just inevitability, the way truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how long it takes. I thought of her face the day at the hospital, red with fury, trembling with entitlement. And then of this photograph, pale, hollow, stripped of all the confidence she once flaunted. It wasn't revenge, it was gravity. Sooner or later, what's false collapses under its own weight. Outside, a bird landed on the windowsill, pecking lightly against the glass. I took a sip of my tea, folded the newspaper, and set it aside. Justice, I realized, doesn't always come from courts or police reports. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in headlines, in whispers, in the way people look away when they hear your name. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I simply felt complete. The balance had been restored. A few weeks later, the papers were signed. The divorce was final. Andrew came home. Not to the house he had shared with her, but to the small one we once filled with laughter and quiet mornings. The place that had always been ours. The place that, after all the chaos, felt alive again. We spent the first day cleaning from dawn until dusk, dusting, scrubbing, mending small things that had been neglected. Andrew moved slowly, his body still healing, but there was a steadiness in his motions, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. We painted over the wall where Laura had once hung her smiling portraits, the same wall that had felt foreign in my own house. The fresh paint gleamed softly, pale and clean, like the start of something new. Outside, we worked together in the garden. The soil was dry but forgiving. Andrew knelt beside me, helping replant the lavender bushes that had been trampled and burned. The scent rose quickly, filling the air with something familiar, something honest. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was healing. By evening, the house looked different. Not perfect, not polished, just real. The kind of home where peace could breathe again. Andrew cooked a simple dinner, and we ate together by the window, the sound of crickets humming outside. For the first time in a long time, he smiled, a small, genuine smile that made his face look like it did when he was still a boy. That night, after he had gone to bed, I brewed a pot of tea and carried it out to the porch. The air smelled of earth and blossoms. The sky stretched wide and calm, stars faint behind a thin veil of spring clouds. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, listening to the gentle rustle of the wind moving through the lavender. Holding the warm cup in both hands, I whispered to the quiet night, "Justice isn't about revenge. It's the universe restoring its balance, softly but surely." The words didn't come from bitterness, but from peace. I thought of all that had been lost, and all that had been found again. My son was home. The house was whole. And though the past couldn't be erased, it no longer had power over us. The balance had been restored. A few months later, I returned to the old city library, the place that had once been my sanctuary. The faint scent of paper and polished wood lingered in the air, unchanged by time. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, painting soft amber patterns on the floor. As I walked past the familiar aisles, I felt a quiet gratitude for endurance, for peace, for the gentle rhythm of ordinary days returning. Outside, Andrew was waiting by the car. His face looked stronger, the color returned to his cheeks. That morning, he had helped me replant the lavender bushes by the porch, the same ones that had been trampled, then revived. Their fragrance drifted on the breeze, reminding me that even what's broken can bloom again with enough care. The cats followed me everywhere now, curling at my feet, chasing dust motes in the sunlight, filling the house once more with soft, living sounds. I found comfort in their presence. They didn't need words to remind me that life, after all its storms, always finds a way to settle. That evening I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching dusk settle over the garden. I opened my journal, the one that had followed me through grief, truth, and renewal, and wrote, "Justice doesn't need to scream. Sometimes it breathes quietly through truth." The ink flowed easily this time, steady and certain. I closed the book, exhaled, and let the moment be. There was no triumph, no bitterness, just peace. Then I looked out into the deepening twilight and thought of others, women who might be sitting somewhere in their own quiet rooms, holding pain they never told anyone about. And I whispered to the night, as if speaking to them, "If you've ever been betrayed, silenced, or made to feel invisible, don't keep your story locked away. Share it, speak it aloud, because wisdom never ages and dignity never dies." Somewhere, I hoped, another woman would hear those words and remember that truth, even spoken softly, can still move mountains.